So, welcome everybody. We are here today with Frank Lepkowski, who has a current exhibition up at Playground Detroit called Endless Summer. It's on view through July 19th. And I will quickly introduce Frank to those who may not be familiar with him as an artist. And then Frank is going to go through a live demo and a little bit of a history, archiving some of his previous works. And then we're going to open up for a few questions that I have for him. And then we'll take any audience questions as well. So if you have any of those, you could put them in the chat throughout the duration of the session today. So, Frank Lepkowski is a Detroit-based artist whose practice bridges technology and human experience. He creates custom software and interactive tools that rely on physical interaction and translates these into layered analog compositions. His work reflects on the overload of our digital age, and it's rendered through textures and saturated color. He has had various exhibitions with Playground Detroit, Level 3 Gallery in Chicago, and Skylab Gallery in Ohio. And most recently, he exhibited his work at Future Fair in New York City. And he is also a special lecturer at Oakland University in the Department of Art and Art History. And with that, I know you're not here to listen to me. I will turn it over to Frank, and he will share his screen and continue the presentation.
Cool. Thanks, Paulina, and hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. And yeah, just gonna get things going over here. So in preparation for today, I just kind of wanted to walk through a bit of a mini historical journey, talking through like basically what brought me here. And so like on my artist website, just to go way, way back for a second, I just wanted to show like some of the physical paintings that I used to make. So I used to be a physical painter. I used to work with stencils and airbrush, and I would do a lot of digital work to get these things done. And eventually I went in more on the digital side of things and like went through a process where I was working through abstraction for a long time. And then I would end up, creating these physical paintings from that series. And eventually it started to feel like painting was just like a fabrication method, right? Like it didn't feel like I was painting like a painter would paint. Like there wasn't any, serendipity or accidents or, uh, like I guess, organic things that would come out of the paint. It was all kind of programmed in my mind. So I was like, well, why paint if that's the way that I'm painting? And so eventually from there, I started to kind of go and hone more on the digital side of things and just try to figure out ways of like fabricating things into reality. So this is one of actually the first painting that I made in this way where I was really focusing on just using vector strokes and gradient as a way of distinguishing the strokes from one another. And I was pulling from an archive of old photos that were, from my like iPhone 3GS that were in these, that were backed up in these really weird folders. And so I was just kind of like, going into an archive, pulling photos that I had taken myself, and then redrawing these photos using this kind of very simple visual language. And then eventually I started, adding more detail and trying to get, I guess, closer to, I guess, the original like feeling of the photograph. And this is like an early exhibition of my work that I put on myself at a place called Pony Ride back in 2017. And then to jump forward a little bit, I was, all of these early paintings were all made in Illustrator, and I was kind of densely layering these strokes. And eventually, I kind of, working on the computer a lot. There's a lot of rote processes, kind of, uh, I don't know, just not good for your body, right? To be on the computer for that long and to be doing these kind of like rigid, kind of repetitive motions, essentially. And so I was really into the idea of like trying to create a physical way of making paintings at body scale. And so that's what this is. This is kind of like, if anybody remembers like smart boards, this is kind of like a homegrown version of a smart board. Essentially, I have an infrared pointer. That's what's going on in my hands. And there's a Wiimote that is picking up that infrared pointer, and then that's used to essentially control my computer. And this is a very, very early version of the painting app that I still use today. And just using it kind of at a bigger, broader scale here. So at the time, I was really interested in this idea of like sharing authorship with the machine. There kind of being like a ping-ponging back and forth of authorship. And so I just want to demonstrate like the kind of current version of my app and what this looks like. So this essentially this color that I'm about to use was the entirety of this first version of the app that you were seeing before. And what this does is it basically has a palette, a pre-selected palette of colors. And then with every stroke that I draw, it selects two colors from the palette and creates a gradient. So like me, the person, right, I'm deciding like what to draw, what that shape should look like. But then the app is deciding, you know, what the color should be. And so there's kind of a ping-ponging back and forth of authorship, and I'm kind of reacting to the app and the colors that it selects. And so I basically worked through a bunch of like abstract work at this time. And so this is a larger scale version from the early days of the app. Um, I quilted these together, just kind of uh, having fun with the different like stitch patterns that I had on my sewing machine at the time. And then this was one that made it into my 2021 show, Afterimage at Playground. And then this was a bigger kind of manifestation of the same work. This was a commission, Louis Vuitton. It's still on view here at the store at Somerset. There's kind of like this like private shopping room. It's like sometimes open, sometimes closed. Um, and that's kind of made in the same way where there's these small stitching details. And another commission piece through Playground at Takoi. And this was a show of entirely abstract work, a two-person show with Ye Jimin in Chicago at Level 3 Gallery. See, we got something in the chat. I'm just going to take a look. Okay, cool. So to go back to the 2021 show, Afterimage, this is at the Riverside, and the show was kind of split up between like two veins of work. One that you see here in this piece is like these pieces that I called after images. So they're really made up of like a collage essentially of imagery that I find online, and it's all essentially based on screenshots from this one was screenshots from Instagram and social media. And then in the future, I'd start working on works that like span towards YouTube. So this is one of the pieces that we showed at Future Fair, which was entirely based on like the YouTube algorithm. So I would just screenshot the YouTube homepage, those like top 8 suggested videos for you, and would kind of make a collage from that, and then repaint this on the computer. And then these are printed and quilted onto canvas. So that's one vein, right? Was this collage style imagery. And then another vein was, I would say, like more personal and more dealing with memory. And these works were examples of that. They were essentially 12 works in the show, uh, each from a month of the previous year. So there's this kind of like diary-like component to it, right? Where I'm reflecting back in time and trying to pull out like one photograph that I'd taken myself from each month of the previous year and like trying to tell the story of a year through those paintings. And so I think here this starts to relate a lot to the body of work that I put together for Endless Summer, but we'll come back to that in a second. So skipping forward a little bit, this stuff was still made in Illustrator. And I was kind of working on my painting app in the background and adding like more and more functionality. And so I started adding different colors to the color palette with this piece that you see here. So I was able to like clearly define things like the sky, the trees, the leaves. And then with this piece, I implemented some color dropping functionality. So if I pull up my painting app really quick, um, and I'm just going to pull up a recent image here. So this, works much like the eyedropper tool that you uh, have in Illustrator or Photoshop, but it does something when I select this color swatch tool, it does something called color rounding. So basically, if I pick, say, a green from this leaf, and then maybe I pick a purple from this lavender, what it's going to do is it's not going to take explicitly those values, but it's going to take values that are close to those values that are from a predefined like swatch that I've defined, and it's going to round the values to those two. So you can kind of see it clearly here, like when I pick a shadow, like this tan isn't quite the same tan that's on the sidewalk, but it's a rounded value that's within my predefined kind of set of colors. Um, and so what that does is it really kind of streamlines the painting process, and it allows me to like focus on the parts of painting that I really want to focus on, which is more this kind of like, you know, interpretive part of it of like trying to make something that feels like evocative of the feeling that I had at the time, and not necessarily just like a photorealistic representation in a painting. I also wanted to show like the physical versions of these pieces. So I feel like there's essentially two veins, right? There's like the digital work, and then there's the physical work. And not all things that I make digitally end up physically fabricated. But this was one that I was happy with like the embroidery, especially like these details and the leaves and the branches. And then this is that same Winter Sublime piece, and just some close-up details of the embroidery. And then uh, as I'm kind of honing more and more of the app, I'm basically able to get more and more detailed with the imagery. So I feel like this piece was a pretty good representation of that, where like the branches, for example, these kind of hues in the clouds. One thing I loved about this was there's something that happens in the photo of this. This was taken when I was driving across the country. I was in a McDonald's parking lot actually, and looking out on this scene in Iowa. And the clouds just felt like they were like mountains or something. Like it just had this really kind of, I think a lot of people in the Midwest experience this, where the clouds just take on this like sculptural feeling and feel really physical. And I felt like that came through in the painting. I was really happy with that. But it felt like I don't know, it happened in a different way than the photo. Um, so yeah, I think that takes us up to like the current work for the show in Endless Summer. And so I just wanted to show some of these. This one's the largest piece in the show. It's definitely like body scale. I kind of wanted to make it a little larger than life to kind of feel like you're staring down the sidewalk here. And this is on burlap. So there's like a quality to it where, let me pull up a detail. Um, there's essentially the lights in the gallery really like warm this piece, and then there's also a layer of burlap beneath this top layer, this quilted layer that you're seeing, that's like like I sprayed a layer of acrylic on it. So there are some colors that are coming through here that you kind of just have to see in person, but like especially like the yellow area, I've got some fluorescent yellows that are underneath on the underpainting layer of burlap, that really kind of like warm the composition and make it feel like sunlit. And I'm just going to pop through a couple of these. The show is split up into two kind of smaller bodies of work. The first half of the gallery, when you walk in, is all like sunlit works that like happen in the daytime. There's kind of a split between day and night, essentially. And so um, when you get, this is the front half of the gallery with all the sunlit works, and then the back half of the gallery is all like nighttime, essentially. Uh, so we have the dusk in Iowa we showed before. Um, this one's called Promenade One. It's from a photo taken at Dali in the Alley. Um, uh, and these little details that you see here are like free stitch embroidery um, on these individual lights. And I think for me, one of the things that I was really interested with this piece was that Detroit like doesn't have a lot of promenades. It's not really a walkable city, right? Like everything was built and uh, built for cars over time. And then things like Dali, turns these streets into promenades, a place where basically you can walk to see and be seen. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just became really obsessed with this concept, and I've got a few works that are in this series, some in Detroit and some not. This one's called Hit and Run. Small detail there. And this one's called Reflection Portrait 2. And this one is a twister study. More free stitch embroidery happening here. So this is me actually like running burlap manually through a machine. And I think we'll end on this one. This is untitled Red Room. So yeah, I think with that maybe we can open it up for questions.
Excellent. Thanks, Frank. Did a great job with that. Appreciate you. So I'm going to ask a few questions. And then if anybody else has questions, we can open it up in the chat too. So are there any specific visual or thematic motifs that you find yourself drawn to repeatedly most in your work?
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, I was just talking about this recently. Like a lot of the work comes from, if you'll notice, like I think most of what I just showed is all portrait orientation images. And maybe I'll just screen share again while I'm talking. Um, like this one. Uh, and I think indirectly what's happening here is it's just really referencing like the form factor of the phone, right? Like I think it's interesting that like not that long ago, like horizontal orientation was the predominant way we consumed media, right? Like think television, movies. But now like with the shift to like the vertical form factor of the phone, that's the primary way I think that we like see and understand the world. I think in terms of attention and the way people see the world. It's really all this like vertical orientation. And so for me, it's just that's the primary like subject matter, the fascination that I have is just how we see and understand the world, and how that's changed. But I think there's also just like there's through lines, right? There are things that just feel pretty universal to everyone, and that's kind of I guess what I'm going off of.
Nice. How do you decide when a digital piece is finished, especially when you're working in a
Mm.
medium that has infinite and endless possibilities to edit?
Yeah, so I'm going to show some layers here. I think this is a good example. I'm just going to pop this open. So this is like a finished work, and this was made essentially layer by layer, my painting app. Um, so this is the original photo. And then this, you can see that there's kind of layers, blockier layers, and then slightly, blurrier, more detailed. And so essentially the way that I work on something kind of starts at the most like blurry and abstract. I kind of look at this as like an underpainting, right? That I can layer on top of. And then each layer kind of gets more and more detailed. So this was some kind of foreground details in here. So there's like links from a chain link fence, these individual like little flowers of lavender, and then up here like these branches kind of as they're blending with the sky. And so it's kind of tough to say, but there's just this uh, intuitive level of something feeling done. And I think a lot of painters talk about this, but like not wanting something to be like overworked or like becoming just, I think maybe just a little too rigid or something. Like there still needs to be some like some freedom and some like play in the way that the image gets made. So I like to not push things or not try to like refine things too much. And then I'll also like, so at this point, right, this is one of the this is actually the most recent painting I've done. Um, I print it and then I pin it up. I have a bulletin board in my room here, and I just sit with the image for a while. And so sometimes layers get added on after the fact, but oftentimes it just takes me some time to like feel like what, intuitively whether or not something is done.
That's awesome. We love the preview of this work. I like that you kept the shadow in there.
Mhm. Yeah, it's I've done another one like this where there's a shadow and it's like a portrait essentially. I like kind of I don't know. I'm definitely in a place now where I'm trying to do more figures and I'm thinking a lot more about that.
Nice. All right, I have another couple questions, and then, like I said, we'll open it up to anybody who'd like to ask one as well. So as you've explained, your practice incorporates this digital and analog loop, drawing digitally with your tools, then printing on canvas, and then sometimes, embroidering or painting, to finish the piece by hand. How do you maintain creative control and a personal connection across all of these different layers? It's just like there's so many steps. Like, how do you stay, um, how do you have the control that you want in this process?
Yeah. I'll say that like I think digitally it maintains a lot of control, right? Like in a way I think that's like the most control that I can exert over something is just like there's that's why I work on the computer, right? There's a lot of fluency and uh like speed, iteration, like it just makes things faster and easier to do. And then I think when it comes to like the physical fabrication of things, uh I think that's where there's a little more like play and a little more openness. And so I don't know. I think for me, it just all takes time and being able to like sit with something for a while and not rush like whether or not something like feels done. Um, and so yeah, I think that's it's. I want to pull up an image of another piece here. Yeah, this one. Um, I think this is a good example of any piece that has embroidery is something where like there's a process of like just sitting with the physical piece and thinking like, does this have like all of the elements that makes it feel like a finished work? And for me, it was like pulling out these details in the flowers and adding embroidery to that. Uh, I think it's almost like a I feel like it feels painterly, right? Like it feels like I'm making decisions about a painting, but it's just adding layers and layers of things until they just about feel done. Um, so yeah, I think that's kind of how I maintain control in authorship is like it's just about time and sitting with things honestly.
Nice. I have two more questions and then we'll open it up. And we've got about just less than 10 minutes. So thanks everybody for being with us today. How has your relationship with technology, both as a tool and a subject, evolved over time?
Uh, I think so as a subject, I was really interested in looking externally before, I think, and like that's like the YouTube paintings and pulling things from social media. I think were uh, really interesting to me when I was a little bit younger. And I think and these things might change, right? I'm not sure if this is going to be a forever thing or not, but I feel like now I think the source of truth for me is just my own experience, like turning inward, basing things off of memory or off of like just coming from like myself as a source. I think it feels like feels like it's like the art and the books and everything that I read like are made that way that prioritize like the author or the artist as like the central like figure telling you things about their own life from their own experience. That's the stuff that resonates the most with me. So that to me feels like what I want to do. It's the way I want to keep working. So I think before I had maybe more of an external focus, and now I think I'm more internally focused.
I love that. Okay, well, I would like to open it up. I know we've got a good amount of folks on here, so thanks everybody. If you want to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat, and I can unmute you. And we got about, yeah, almost more than 5 minutes. Yeah, Simon.
Uh, Thank you. Thanks, Paulina. Uh, Really inspiring presentation, Frank. My question is involving uh, the decision or the process of when you work digitally, but then you bring it into the world, and when it exists in a physical space. Like I'm seeing this presentation. I'm on my cell phone, and it's like, oh, the work looks beautiful, and it looks beautiful. The images that you've made on your screen, but also hanging, in different galleries or different settings, and like, oh, this is I can imagine it being powerful and impactful. And my question is kind of around, is the work for you, is it done when it exists in the space, when it becomes real, or did Frank leave? Did Frank get he's he's gone.
Sorry
Oh, he's
about
back.
that.
No, that's
I think
fine.
my internet just cut out. Sorry.
No, that's fine. So I was just wondering, is the work done when you kind of like you finish it on your screen, and then you're like, all right, now I'm going to transfer it into a physical format, or like what is it about bringing it into like a physical space that is makes it part of your work rather than kind of remaining digitally?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good question, and I feel like this answer is somewhat of a cop out, but the answer is I think it's done in both places. So I think when a digital painting is done, and sometimes it might only exist that way, and I just want to show an example of that as well. Um, Sometimes it might only exist as a digital painting, and that's totally cool with me. And then sometimes it just feels like it needs to also exist as a physical thing. Um, and I'm just going to give an example. Um, I think this one was an example of like, felt to me like, uh, I like this as a digital image. It feels like kind of ambiguous, and then just for some reason didn't feel like it needed to make its way into the physical world. And I think that's done, right? And then let's give an example of like uh, something that like was brought into the physical world. And I think that it's once I print this and make this, it feels like a finished product in its own way and has a different relationship with the viewer. So I kind of look at it as like they're two separate things, and I'm okay with uh, like yeah them being totally separate and existing once in the world and once in the digital space.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody else have, I think we have time for about maybe one more question. And John, would you like to? Okay, go ahead.
Hey Frank. Yeah, I love your work. I'm curious, as someone who's embraced like digital technology as a way of performing your art, how do you see these tools? How do you see artificial intelligence as like a tool in the future for like art? Do you see this as something as like a tool in your kit, or is that something that, what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence playing in art?
Yeah, I'm very interested in it. I think for me there's like I think there's a lot to say about this, but I'm more interested in just somewhat non-traditional applications of it. So like a good example is like generative AI, right? Everybody can think of generative AI images that they've seen. I'm more interested in like applying machine learning to like my app as it exists currently. So like I was drawing strokes earlier, and you can imagine like if I had a machine learning tool that basically like learned what made a stroke, and then if I draw one stroke, it draws five others based on training data that's only made up from my hand. I just think that like for me, it's more interesting if it extends my own hand and not to not to become an author, right? Like I think that's the distinction I would make that feels most interesting to me. That said, I think there are a lot of artists that are working with it in interesting ways. So I don't mean to say that like generative AI isn't, that it's not possible to make art with generative AI or something like that. But I think for me, it's just more interesting for the human to be at the center of things.
For sure. Cool. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, awesome. All right. So basically, I think we will wrap up because we've got about 1 minute left on the clock. And I just want to thank Frank again for chatting with us today. This is really interesting. And I also want to open up this to anyone else. If you have questions, feel free to shoot us a message on Instagram. Definitely come check out the show in person because, as Frank mentioned, these works are digital, but some of them really should be in the physical presence. And so seeing the detail and the texture of them would be awesome. The gallery is open tomorrow, but is closed for the holiday weekend. And then it's on view through July 19th. And we also have a brunch on July 20th with Frank where you can actually chat with him in person a bit more if you'd like to do that too. That's hosted by Art Detroit Now. So before we get kicked off, I will say goodbye to everybody. So thank you so much and have
Bye.
a great day.